If Todd Christensen would have had it his way, he never plays it down as a professional at the tight end position. That is fairly ironic considering he would go on to become one of the best tight ends in NFL history. His playing career came to an end before the start of the 1989 season, but that door closing would open up another door for Christensen. The former BYU Cougar would go on to forge a broadcasting career that is really underappreciated. Hell, he's probably the only person out there who could make American Gladiators seem legitimate. If Kellen Winslow revolutionized playing the tight end position during the 1980s, Todd Christensen revolutionized what being a tight end meant. You could be yourself. You could have a personality as a tight end and be visible in the public eye, even if your persona was a bit out there. Make no mistake, there's no Shannon Sharpe, Tony Gonzalez, or Rob Gronkowski without the man sporting a mustache and a vocabulary that would make your college comp professor blush. An articulate wordsmith, a damn fine pass catcher, a Super Bowl champion, and a proper bohemian. This is the story of Todd Christensen, the tight end who didn't want to be a tight end at all.
I do not begrudge Mel Kiper and his minions their little cottage industry. In fact, I'm always entertained by his Pennzoil-fueled Eddie Munster coiffures.
There is a football card out there that shows the receiving leaders for the 1986 NFL season. On the NFC side, you have Jerry Rice, the man who most people think about when the topic of catching passes comes up. But if you look over at the left-hand side of this card, there is Los Angeles Raiders tight end Todd Christensen. It's wild for a few different reasons. For starters, tight ends were an afterthought in most offenses up until 1980. Sure, there were some tight ends who were also capable receiver, guys like Dave Casper, Jerry Smith, and Jackie Smith all spring to mind, but these were exceptions, not the rule. But what makes the moment encapsulated in that football card all the more improbable is that Christensen did not want to be a tight end. So how do we get from not wanting to play tight end at all to becoming one of the best to have ever done it? Well, to answer that question, let's go all the way back to Christensen's early days at BYU. Early on, you could say Christensen had a bit of Keyshawn Johnson in him. There is a great quote about Christensen's early years at BYU from one of his old quarterbacks, Gary Shahidi, who told CougTube this.
He just kept saying, give me the ball, give me the ball. And I told him early on, I said, shut up. I said, we'll get you the ball when we want to get you the ball.
Give him the damn ball, indeed. The thing, though, with Christensen is that he was 6'3", 215 pounds during his time at BYU. It meant it took a little creativity to find ways to actually get the ball in his hands. He didn't have the mold of a running back or a wide receiver. Tight end was basically nothing more than an extra offensive lineman for most offenses. So by process of elimination, Christensen was a fullback. That did fulfill his wish to have the ball in his hands a lot. In fact, when you look at his junior and senior seasons at BYU, he would lead the team in receptions and be among the team leaders in rushing attempts. After a successful collegiate career, Christensen would be taken by the Dallas Cowboys with the final pick of the second round in 1978. On the surface, this seemed like the perfect landing spot for Christensen. He could partner up with the team's first-round draft pick from the previous season, Tony Dorsett, to create a formidable backfield, one of the NFL's best. He was also a natural replacement for the Cowboys fullback at that time, Robert Newsom, who was regularly involved in the offense. The best made plans, though, were laid to waste after Christensen suffered a broken foot during the preseason of his rookie campaign. During that offseason, the Dallas Cowboys coaching staff approached him about a position switch moving from fullback to tight end. To put it lightly, Christensen had absolutely no interest on any such move. There just wasn't enough action for him at the tight end position. He certainly had a point in that regard. Cowboys fullbacks were averaging anywhere between 140 and 180 touches per season during the 1970s. Tight ends were lucky to get 40 touches any given year. Simply put, Christensen was...
I'm just about that action, boss.
That action was not happening at tight end. It's really important to note where exactly we are on the tight end positional evolution timeline. Ozzie Newsome had been drafted in 1978, Kellen Winslow would be taken in 1979, but we are still very much in the NFL's tight end dark ages here. It was a position where you basically did a lot of blocking, and if you were lucky, you caught a pass or two each game. The situation between Dallas and Todd Christensen never really resolved itself. He reported to Cowboys training camp where the team was very adamant that he was going to play at tight end. Christensen, on the other hand, was very vocal about not wanting to play tight end in the slightest. In the end, Dallas just simply released him before the start of the 1979 season. They let go of a second-round pick who never suited up for the team. From there, he was claimed on waivers by the New York Giants, had a very brief cup of coffee in the Big Apple, had a few other tryouts, and then eventually latched on with the then Oakland Raiders. I want to focus on the number Christensen would choose to wear with the Raiders, 46. This number is one that can be worn by both running backs and tight ends. It also seems to be indicative of the different visions each party had as to what the future would hold for this partnership. The Raiders' leading rusher during 1979 and 1980 was Mark Van Egan, a former fullback who had a similar height-weight build to Christensen. There can be little doubt he saw what the Raiders had done with Van Egan and thought to himself, you know, maybe I'll get an opportunity to do something similar given that my background's the same, I'm the same build, I'm the same size. There had to have been some belief in Christensen's mind that, you know what, maybe I would be the next Van Egan. On the other hand, Tom Flores and Oakland's coaching staff saw something in Christensen that led them to believe he could eventually replace Raymond Chester or Dave Casper, two fairly prolific tight ends by the standards of the time. 46 was this compromise number. Christensen thought it would get him into the running back room. The Raiders were like, well, we can use it as a tight end, so maybe you're going to go in that direction. And it just stuck. He was 46 throughout his entire career with the Raiders. Ultimately, though, neither side really won this. Christensen spent his first 3 seasons playing almost exclusively on special teams. He was long snapper for a bit, returned a fumble for a touchdown, and he won the Super Bowl in 1980. Not bad at all. However, as all of that was happening in 1980, in 1981, the tight end position itself was dramatically evolving thanks to a pair of innovative offenses. In San Diego, Don Coryell's system saw Kellen Winslow lead the league in receptions as a tight end. And in San Francisco, Bill Walsh's West Coast offense saw Dwight Clark finish in the top 3 in catches. Hell, even Joe Sensor of the Minnesota Vikings caught 79 balls in 1981. The tight end position had well and truly gone from an afterthought to a place where players could have
that action, boss.
The 1982 season finally saw Christensen unleashed as a tight end by the Raiders. Both sides had bought into it, both sides had a plan, and all of a sudden, Christensen was this unstoppable force. In 82, he led the Raiders in both receptions and touchdown catches, a far cry from the minuscule number he had had the previous 3 years. However, it was during the 1983 season when Christensen truly came into his own. During the Raiders Super Bowl run, he led the league in receptions with 92, posted 1,247 yards and 12 touchdowns. It was the single greatest season by a tight end in NFL history until Rob Gronkowski came along in 2011. But this was just a start. The next 3 seasons were equally impressive. He caught 80 or more passes each season, finished with more than 1,000 receiving yards in all but 1985 when we had 987. There were also 33 touchdown catches over this span. It was a run of dominance not seen until Travis Kelce would pair up with Patrick Mahomes in Kansas City. That, of course, is interesting in its own right. Kelce had one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time throwing him passes. Christensen, well, his situation was not quite to that standard. No, he had an aging Jim Plunkett and former BYU teammate Mark Wilson throwing him passes. Those two were constantly shuttling in and out of the lineup, by the way. They were injured, they were benched for poor performance. It was kind of a mess at quarterback for the Raiders, which makes what Christensen did over this span all the more impressive. On the field during this time, Christensen was one of the best. Off the field, the Raiders' move to Los Angeles opened up other opportunities for him to explore. He was always sort of seen as a great interview by the media. He had a robust vocabulary, a quick wit, and this one-of-a-kind delivery that you wouldn't find from football players or most professional athletes. Christensen was in a Taco Bell commercial.
I'm gonna eat the bowl, but I'm gonna break it first.
Made an appearance on the Johnny Carson show. He was even a square on the new Hollywood Squares alongside Gladys Knight without the pips and Rich Little, who still uses the same outdated material today that people were complaining was outdated in the mid-1980s. I really want to go on a rant about Rich Little. I'm not going to do it. I want to do it, I'm not going to do it, but Rich Little is the worst, and let's just move on quickly. When Christensen wasn't making guest spots in Tinseltown, he found time to contribute to various sports shows like Inside the NFL on HBO and ESPN Sports Look, in addition to doing some local radio. The things that were always apparent about Christensen's media work, even at this early stage of his career, was that he was very different from just about everyone else in the world of sports, and it was very genuine. He was being who he was. There aren't a lot of NFL players out there almost flippantly using SAT words as if it was nothing. That was Christensen, and he didn't want to change, even if there was an assumption that his audience wouldn't always know what he was saying. Throughout most of his career, Christensen is referred to as the Renaissance man because he was just so different from most of the sporting landscape, but in particular, you'll hear a lot of people saying how he didn't quite fit in with Raider culture. He was well-spoken and intelligent, and, well, most of the Raiders were not seen as either one of those two things. But to me, that has always missed the point of the Raider way. Being a Raider isn't simply being a ruffian. It's doing your own thing and doing it how you want to do it while not giving a damn about what other people think. That is Todd Christensen. He was going to do what he wanted to do. Everyone else, be damned. Maybe he didn't always look or sound like the rest of the Raiders of that era, who were very rough around the edges, but Christensen was just as much of a rebel as any of the other great rebels in Raiders history. Back to the football field, the Raiders were a franchise in decline by 1987, and similarly, Christensen's 4-year run of dominance had come to an end. His numbers in 1987 are not terrible by any means, but it was just less than the lofty standards he had previously set for himself. And obviously, the players' strike that year didn't help him or anyone else's cause. After a losing campaign, Tom Flores was replaced by Mike Shanahan ahead of the 1988 season. Injuries would derail that campaign for Christensen, but he still wanted to play on in 1989. A big reason for that was a conversation he said he had with Raiders owner Al Davis. According to Christensen, he was told that not only was he going to be given a shot to make the Raiders in 1989, but he would also be given a chance to play and see the field if he earned it. A bunch of petty Raiders drama ensued during that training camp, which saw Christensen released before the season began. With no other team interested in signing the aging veteran coming off an injury, Christensen would quietly retire before the start of the 1989 season. His 4-year run as the NFL's leading tight end and one of the league's best pass catchers overall still stands out to this day. Even now, when you go back and you look at the numbers and you look at the era Christensen was playing and what he did during this time was staggering. But it's all the more staggering, all the more stupefying when you consider Christensen spent years trying to not play tight end. Seriously, if Christensen would have had his way, he would have replaced Robert Newsom as the Dallas Cowboys fullback all those years ago. Instead, he ended his career as one of the best to have ever played at the tight end position in the NFL. However, this is only half of his contributions to both the tight end position and the sport of football in general. The timing of Christensen's release so close to the start of the 1989 season really sucked for him. Not only was he unable to latch on with a new ball club ahead of that campaign, but all of the TV networks had filled their broadcast teams for the season as well. While he had known he was going to pursue a media career once his playing days ended, there wasn't much available for him to pursue at that moment in time. Then a little program called American Gladiators had an opening and needed an athlete to come fill it. Joe Theismann did the first run of episodes in late 1989, but he was always kind of an odd fit next to Mike Adamle. Christensen, with time on his hands and wanting to be a broadcaster, said what the hell and gave it a shot. It's easy to dismiss American Gladiators for what it was, campy, cheesy, syndicated television, whatever you want to call it, but Christensen's work during that run in the first season is actually really good when you watch it. He found the right balance between adding seriousness to the proceedings while still not going too far with it, not making it seem like a bigger deal than it was. There was just an understanding that what was transpiring at American Gladiators was kind of a joke, but it wasn't one that you could just dismiss entirely. Also, the chemistry between Christensen and Adamle, even in this short run, they were together for 13 episodes, it is just they had this great partnership. Of course, Christensen would not be back for a second season. After a brief tryout with the Oakland A's in the spring of 1990, NBC locked him up to be color commentator for NFL games, and he stayed with the network until 1994 doing professional ball and Fiesta Bowl and some other stuff for the network. After a cameo on Married with Children, he would move to ESPN in the mid-1990s. There, he did a lot of college football. He also helped show a young Kirk Herbstreit the ropes while calling arena football for the network. He was never one of ESPN's top guys or lead color commentators, but he was still damn good at what he did. Eventually, Christensen would make his way to Mountain West Sports Network, a network, by the way, that was way too far ahead of its time and also a precursor to the failure the Pac-12 would experience years later. During his time with the Mten, as it was stylized, Christensen called various football games and helped with studio shows as needed. His work here is superb. It didn't get a lot of broadcast. It wasn't in a lot of households, but if you go back and watch some of Christensen's work for this network, it was exceptional. There is a legendary rant he went on about the NFL draft combine that is one of the most, I don't know, like here's a clip of it. I'll put a link in the description to the full thing, but this thing is just so good.
What do you think would be the response of a young barrister fresh out of law school to be told by the firm he is soon to ply his trade with that he was required to work on his gait to the courtroom?
It's a shame that Christensen was never given a bigger platform on television. A lot of people focus too much on how Christensen would say stuff, how he would make a point, the words he would use, so much so that oftentimes the point he was trying to make would get lost. And that's a shame because there are few people who had the knowledge or passion for all things sports that Christensen had. Could have Christensen toned down his verbose style to appeal to a more mainstream audience in the 90s and early 2000s? Sure, of course he could, but that wasn't who he was. And if there's one thing we know about Todd Christensen, it's that he was going to be himself. That is why he didn't want to play tight end for the Dallas Cowboys in 1979. He valued being an individual more than anything else. And at a time, in an era where conformity reigned supreme, Christensen was a trailblazer for this dedication to being an individual, to being himself. Todd Christensen, the tight end, had a major impact on the sport of football. But Todd Christensen, the media personality and broadcaster, played just as important of a role. If it wasn't for Christensen's fearlessness and being himself, even if it was seen as a bit eccentric or a bit out there, who knows in the years that follow if Shannon Sharpe or Rob Gronkowski would be granted that same freedom to be themselves, even though it did kind of break the mold. Todd Christensen may have never wanted to play tight end, but thankfully that's where he ended up because the positive impact he made for the position, both on and off the field, has been second to none. Sadly, Todd Christensen passed away in 2013 at the age of 57. Thank you for watching this video. If you would like to learn more about the time the NFL held its championship game in the middle of a racetrack, video in the upper right hand corner of your screen is the place to go. Until next time, I am Cheyenne Hollis, this is The Touchback, and as always, hashtag take it out to the 25.